shading. Сделать мне, что ли?
G'day! If you are new to Blender, then welcome. You're in the right place. This is a complete beginner's tutorial series designed to show you how to use all the main features of Blender whilst learning how to create a delicious donut and some coffee. Now, I know you are excited, you want to start clicking on things and learning things, but since this is part one of a series, I want to take just 60 seconds to explain what you will learn and what you won't learn. So, right now, this is you. You are a little red dot and you are entering into the wide world of 3D. And if you've done any research, you probably know there is a lot to learn. And it can be a little overwhelming and you can feel like I'm never going to learn it all, so why bother? Well, the good news is you don't need to know everything. If you're familiar with the 80-20 rule, there is really only 20% of the features inside 3D software that you use 80% of the time. And that is what this course is all about. It's teaching you those core concepts that you're going to use all the time so that you can then, by the end of it, feel confident creating your own projects in the future. So this is all going up for free on YouTube, and I've just separated it by level, just like in terms of chapter, so you know what to expect in terms of difficulty. But if you follow it from start to finish, rest assured, you can create a donut and coffee. That final image there, you can get there because there are 500,000 people who completed the last version of this tutorial that I made 3 years ago. There's even a Blender Donut subreddit where you can see the results of people that finished the last course. So it might look advanced at this stage, like, oh, I don't know 3D, how am I gonna, you can get there, right? If you just follow it through to the end. Now, this is part one of level one, so this is going to be the basics of the basics, and we are going to start with the user interface. And just to keep it interesting, I promise you if you finish the end of this video, you will learn how to set a monkey head on fire. Random, but you'll see. So, open Blender for the first time, and this is what you should see. Now, this big area here, this big patch of space is called the 3D viewport, and it's where you'll spend probably 90% of your time. If you're modeling something, if you're like laying out a scene and you're moving things around, it's all going to happen right
Have
here.
my own startup settings.
Let's talk about moving stuff. So we have the cube here, the default cube selected, and let's say we want to move it. So if you go to the toolbar, you've got a move function, right? And when you do that, you'll see that you get these arrows that appear over your cube. Now, if I just click and drag on any of these arrows, you can see that I'm moving it along that direction, that axis. So there's 3 axes, because there are 3 dimensions in the world: the Z axis, the X axis, and the Y axis. So along those, I can sort of move it anywhere within this space here. Okay, so that's moving, and then the next one underneath that, you've got rotate. I can rotate something along a specific axis. Or by the way, if you just like don't click on any of these like highlighted colors, just click anywhere in there, it's gonna like trackball it, which is like just free rotate. If you release, by the way, it's gonna like, release the mouse, it's going to like drop it wherever you set it to. But if while rotating it, you just right click, it's gonna like cancel the action, or you hit escape, right? But anyways, then you've got scale. So if I click the scale option, now I've got these that function there, or this axis, or that axis, etc. Or click anywhere within there, and now you're scaling just the size of the thing. Okay, so move, rotate, scale. And then by the way, that one down there is like all 3 of them mashed in together for, I don't know, people who are running out of time and they need to click them all at the same time for some reason. But anyways, that's how you can do things, but actually the faster way to work is to memorize the hotkeys, because you're going to use this a lot, and every time you want to like rotate or scale something, if you have to go up here, then click on this, then click on this, it's a lot of work. it doesn't sound like it, but when you're doing it like repeatedly, hundreds of times an hour, it's a lot of work. So what I would suggest you memorize is the hotkeys. So to move something, it's G. G for grab. Okay, G. And when you do that, it's attached to your cursor. So you just tap the key once, and you don't have to like click or hold or anything like that. It's now attached to my cursor. If I right click, I'm canceling the movement. But if while it's moving like that, if I just left click, it's now confirmed the movement. Now it's free movement right now. So if I was to push the letter of any of those axes, like Z, I'm now moving it along the Z axis, or X, or Y. Okay, so again, that's while it's moving. If I hit any of those keys, I can snap it to that axis. Or instead of having to like do a separate key, so while it's moving, if instead of hitting those axes buttons, if I hold down the middle mouse button, which is, did I talk about the middle mouse? I didn't talk about it. I've recorded this tutorial 5 times. If you click in on the scroll wheel, that's the middle mouse button. And if you hold that in, you'll see that it's like snapping it to a specific axis. So that's actually a really fast way to work. So if I hit G, I can move it down. So G, quickly tap middle mouse to get it to the right axis, then click, then G, quickly tap middle mouse, get it to the right axis. I can do this, and I can move this cube anywhere. And it's a really fast way of working. It's great. And those hotkeys work the exact same way. So, sorry, for rotate and scale. So if while rotating, free rotate, X, Y, Z, or middle mouse, and I'm going to rotate it along the X axis. Scaling, again, I don't have to be in scale mode. I can just hit S, S for scale, and that's going to scale it like that. Or I can S, scale along the Y axis by tapping Y, X, Z, or S, middle mouse button, and snap it to a specific axis that I have in mind. Okay, so those hotkeys, G, R, and S, tip of the iceberg, my friends. A lot of hotkeys to come. There's a lot of hotkeys in Blender, and so I created a shortcut PDF with like all the keyboard shortcuts. So if you join my email newsletter, I'll send you that. It's a PDF that you can print out and stick on your wall, or a Google Doc that you can like save and reference on a separate monitor or whatever. But the link for that is in the description if you are interested, because we're going to learn more hotkeys. Okay, so the next hotkey is moving around, like navigating within this space here, because we're just looking at it from this view. But let's say this cube was all the way off screen. Where's it gone? How are we going to see it now? So if you use the middle mouse button, which is again the scroll wheel, if you push that in, if you hold that down, that is called orbiting, or rotating the view, but orbiting, right? And that enables you to rotate around the view. Now you'll see that we can't really get close to that cube there because we're just looking at the center of our scene right now. So if we want to pan to a separate area, if we hold down Shift middle mouse button and drag across, then we are looking at a new area. So those two functions, middle mouse button to orbit, and then Shift middle mouse button to drag to a new section, are very common. So I can go anywhere in my space just with those two functions. Shift middle mouse button to pan, middle mouse button to orbit. So just familiarize yourself
Looks
with
like
that.
I
Just try
should.
to move around to different areas of the canvas, the 3D view, like so. Now, if perchance you do not have a mouse with a scroll wheel, or you're on a laptop with a trackpad, good luck with that, by the way. Tough road ahead. No, but there is another way, which is to use this gizmo in the top right-hand corner. If you just click and drag anywhere within that, that is orbit. And then if you click this hand tool and just hold, that will move it. So this whole gizmo section here was designed, it's a new feature of Blender, but it's basically designed because, you know, we know that tablet devices and everything are on the rise. And at some point, people are going to start using them on Surface tablets or something, and they've only got a stylus. So you don't need a mouse, you know, with all the functions to move around Blender anymore. You've got this if you needed it. Or, by the way, let's say, you know, you just don't have the scroll wheel thing, but you don't want to have to keep using the gizmo. If you go to your user preferences, you'll see something there in input called Emulate 3-button mouse, which will just enable you to use Alt and then left click as the middle mouse alternative, essentially. So, yeah. The other one I quickly mentioned, because I think I've been doing it without realizing, scroll wheel, that's zoom, or you can click hold down the little magnifying glass thing, and you'll zoom in and out. Now, the cube is over there, and we could get to it by panning over there, but when you've got a lot of stuff in the scene, like let's say we duplicate this cube, which you could do by going to Object and then click on Duplicate Objects, but you can see the hotkey there. You can memorize that hotkey, Shift-D. We can move that cube over there, right? So we're looking at the cube over here, but now we've got to get all the way over there. A lot of work. So if you just click on an object and you want to focus on that, like just zoom over there, if you hit the number pad period key, which is, yeah, that little dot in the bottom corner of your number pad, it will focus on that object, okay? So that's a very fast way of like changing your focus. So you don't have to like fart around with like, oh, gotta move over there, extra slow, nice and easy now, easy does it, don't get lost, right? And by the way, going back to people with a laptop, most laptops don't have number pads. So the other hotkey that you should memorize is the tilde key, which is that key underneath the escape key. There's one there that says view selected. So it'll bring up a pie menu, and one of the options in the pie menu is view selected. And release, and there we go. It does the exact same thing as number pad period key. All right, let's delete this little extra cube. Let's find my original cube, and I'm going to move this over back to the center with G, middle mouse, to drag it along the y-axis, and then I'll hit number pad period again and focus on that cube. And look at that, we're back at the start. Now, there's more to Blender than just cubes, so let's make it a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to delete the cube here by just tapping delete, or X if you don't want your arm to move as far. Let's replace it. So I've deleted the cube. Now I'm going to go to the top section up here. You'll see one that says add, and you'll get a whole bunch of options that will appear here, and you can replace it with something. But it's a long way to go for your mouse when you're adding stuff frequently in Blender. So Shift A is a very common hotkey that you should memorize. Shift A, memorize it as add. I'm adding something, Shift A. And you got a whole bunch of stuff here. Now, oh, by the way, this will be applicable like if you're in the node view or if you're in other views within Blender. So Shift A is a good one to memorize. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Some things that I've never used before, like speaker. Don't know what that does. It's just useful to someone, but not to me. The main ones you'll use are underneath mesh. You got a whole bunch of what are called primitives, like plane. You could add in a plane, and it's the ground plane. You got a whole bunch of other really like boring sounding ones, and then you got one right at the bottom there. It's called monkey. So obviously we're going to click it, and this brings us into the final part of this video that I promised you. We're going to set this monkey head on fire, which is a cruel thing to do, but it's not real, so no need to email me. So with the monkey head selected, we're going to use a little Easter egg feature of Blender, but it's like basically if you push F3, this allows you to bring up the search bar, which is actually very common. This isn't the Easter egg part, but F3 is like you can search for anything. Like if you forget the shortcut for something, you can just like type it in, and there it is, and you can do it. But if we type into the search bar smoke, you'll see there's one there called quick smoke. And what this does is it has applied a smoke simulation to my selected object, which basically just saves you from like setting up a box and then setting a smoke sim and blah, 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 blah. It's just done that for you. And then if I hit that play button right at the bottom there, you can see it's smoking. Now I promised you fire though, so if you select the monkey and then click the simulator panel button, which it's getting a bit advanced, but just in here where it says smoke, if you change that to fire and smoke, then there you go. You have set the monkey head on fire. Pretty random, but hey, it's cool, right? So that's the end of this video. Go ahead, click here to watch the next video where I promise you we will start building that donut, because this was just user interface fooling around showing you the basics. And if you haven't already, go ahead and get my PDF, keyboard shortcut PDF. Link is in the description because that'll come in handy for the rest of the series. So I will see you in the next video.
We wake up and check Twitter first thing. Check Twitter first thing.
This video is sponsored by Polygon, a library of textures and models for professional 3D artists. Click the link in the description to learn more. All right, enough fooling around with flaming monkey heads. Let's start making that donut. So I've got a brand new scene open in Blender, so clear whatever you did in the last video. And what I'm going to do is delete the default cube just by hitting delete, and I'm going to replace it by hitting Shift A, remember, to add a new object. And then underneath mesh, we've got the base meshes that you can start with. So you want to start with something that looks closest to what you want to create, which in this case is a donut. So this one is the closest match, a torus. So when you click the torus, you can see you get this, and it's okay, but it looks a little thin. It's a little bit weak for a donut. Thankfully though, in the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see a box, and if you click the box, you can see you get settings, and this is going to change the look of the torus. Now, by the way, if you don't see the box, it's because you accidentally performed an action after you added the torus. So if I was to, for example, click on the donut, even though it's already selected, it's gone, and I can't get those settings back there. So some actions in Blender, you will get options immediately after you perform an action, but if you do another action, it clears it and you don't have those options anymore. Anyway, so with these options here, you can see I could change the resolution of the donut, and down here underneath major radius, I could change the size of it, how thick or how fat the donut is. So speaking of the radius and the size, it's a good idea when you're building something in Blender to start with the correct real world scale. So this major radius here is saying that this is 0.4 meters. The radius, so a diameter, is double that, which means that this is currently an 80 centimeter donut, which is almost half me. It's a big donut, very big. By the way, if you are American and you would like to use a different unit system, you can do it over here in the properties. Underneath units, you can change your unit system to imperial, and then it will use feet and inches and penny farthings or what other crazy units you guys have come up with. You can use that if you want, but for the tutorial, I'm going to stick to metric. So this size here, we want it to match the real world. So the research that I did says that most donuts are about 10 centimeters, right? Like about that big, right? So a radius is half of that. So therefore, this should be 5 centimeters. So if I just typed in here 5 centimeters, we would get the correct thing, which is 0.05 meters. And then if I adjusted my minor radius, I mean, there's obviously no measurement for this, but like, you know, how fat the donut is totally up to you. If you want it to look like chubby, you can, you know, go like that. But I don't know, I think something around like 0.28, I think that looks pretty good. Maybe 0.26, I think that's what I used previously times the times that I did it. But anyways, like that. There we go. That's the one, that's the size I'm going to use. And then the other thing is the resolution of our donut. Now, you might think that you would want to use as high a resolution as possible, right? Because I remember I did that when I was starting out with Blender. Every new object I added, I used the most vertices I could, most highest resolution, not realizing that actually what you want to use is the lowest resolution and then use a subsurf modifier, which we'll get to next, to smooth it out, because then you've got less vertices to work with. It's easier to work with a lower res mesh than a higher res. Anyway, point is we want to set this to something low, but something that will at least have the correct overall shape that we want. So, you know, something like this. And also, I want to keep the size of these faces. I want to keep them close to square, like as square as possible, I want to say. And you're not to know it because, you know, you're just starting out. But the reason for this is later on down the road, we're going to use displacements. And it's much better if you've got square faces for displacements. So anyway, something like that is pretty good. So these are the settings I'm going to use. You have a second to use it. And we're done. Okay, that's it. We have the donut ready to go. So we've added an object, but let's say you want to change the shape of that object, because that's a very common thing you want to do when you're building 3D creations, is you want to tweak it to look how you want it. So right now, this is the most perfect donut that ever existed in the history of the world. You could have like a donut competition and no one would ever be able to make as perfectly round and smooth shape as this, right? Because computers make things that are perfect and in the real world they're not. So that's why imperfection is the virtual perfection, which is a quote by someone, but it's very true. I don't know who said it, but it's very true. So what we want to do is make it look a little bit lumpy, a little bit misshapen. So to do that, we need to enter into edit mode. So if you go to the top corner, top left corner, you can see we are in object mode. And if you change that to edit mode, you will see that we get this, which makes it look like a grid, like a cage has appeared over it. Or the hotkey for this is tab, because this is a very common action. To switch between object mode and edit mode is tab. By the way, when you are in edit mode, the only thing you can do, the only thing you can click on is within the object itself. Like if I'm in edit mode on that and I try to click on the lamp or the camera, you can see nothing happens. The only thing I can click on is the object itself. So just something to keep a note of. So while in edit mode, you can see that now that I'm clicking around, I can click on these little dots here. And each of these dots basically is the shape of the donut, as you can probably guess, right? And if I use the same hotkeys that you remembered from the last one, G to grab, if I was to G and grab this up, you can see that I would make a spike in my donut there. Now, I don't want just one singular spike because that would be horrible. And I also don't want to, like, if I want to make this donut look lumpy, I don't want to go like this one and then this one and then this. Like, that's a lot, that's a lot of work and it's not even going to look very good. What I want to do instead is I want to like grab one and then like have it affect the vertices around it. So there's a tool for that, and it's proportional editing. So at the top of the screen there, there's a little button, or the hotkey for that is O to turn that on and off. And then when I do that, if I use the same shortcut, G, to move this one vertice, you'll see that now as I move it, the rest of the donut comes with it. But it only looks like the whole donut's coming with it. If I was to scroll up, like scroll on my mouse right now, just scroll up or down until you can actually see what's this little circle appear around. So if you scroll up, it'll get smaller. So anyways, if I do this, you can see that I can affect the area of vertices around it, right? So what I want to do is just I want to make it look lumpy. So around that sort of area, and I'm going to hit Z because I'm moving it and I want to move it along the Z axis. So it's just going up. And now you can see I've got part of the donut, which is a little bit lumpy. That's actually probably a little bit too lumpy. So let me just undo that and let's try it again. Move it up. Oh, come on. It's cleared my thing because I undid it anyway. So something like just a little bit lumpy, and then I'm going to grab like this one here, and I'm going to move that down a little bit. So now I've got a weird little lumpy bit of donut, and then I'm just going to like misshape the rest of it, right? Because no donut No donut is perfect, although they do try. Just make it look a little bit squishy, because otherwise it's going to look like a, I don't know, like at a water park, right? There's little inflatable rings that you get. I'll never forget, as a kid, we'd go to the water park a lot, and yeah, there was like this ride called the Calypso Bay at Wet n Wild, Australia, and I used to love like stacking the rings on top of each other, and they kicked me out of the pool. They told me I had to get out because you're not allowed to stack the rings. But it was so fun. I wanted to stack them up and then be inside it and like roll around. But the lifeguards, who have nothing better to do, told me to get out of the pool. Anyway. So as you can see, I'm just grabbing parts of the mesh and I'm just moving it. You don't have to copy my exact motions as I'm doing this, just so you know. Just make your own misshapen donut. Don't copy mine. Follow your instincts. Make your own lumpy looking thing just by clicking G, etc. Anyways, like that. Look at that. Horrible, weird, misshapen looking donut. That's what you want. You don't want a perfect looking donut. You want something that looks weird. So well done. You've made something weird. Now you're probably thinking, cool, but can we please get rid of the jagged look? Because it looks like you would cut your finger running across this donut. It's too jagged. So if you are in object mode, which is important, you have to be in object mode, and you were to right click your mesh, you have these settings. And at the top there, you've got two settings, which are very common: shade smooth or shade flat. So we're going to use smooth. So flat is used for things like buildings, flat planes, things like that. And smooth is for organic shapes like this one. And it's going to basically, where there's two faces, it's going to try to smooth them. Yeah, basically, it'll try and make it look smooth. Now, you'll notice it does look smooth, but the edges of it, you can see it does still look sharp. So shade smooth is just like it's changing the way it looks, but it's not actually affecting the actual shape of it in any way. So if you want to actually make this higher res, what you need to do is use a subsurf modifier. So the modifiers are found in the properties. So this is the properties here, by the way. We haven't really talked that much about properties, but it's this whole section on the right here. So if you click on the wrench spanner, I always get them confused. You can tell I've never got my hands dirty. I'm going to go with spanner, and this is the modifier panel, okay? So it's empty right now, but if you click on add modifier, you get this lovely list. And the one we are looking for is right down here where it says subdivision subsurf. And it's probably the most common mod or like effect that's used across all 3D software. What it does is it smooths out the mesh, right? And as a modifier, so what's good about modifiers is that it is what's called non-destructive, meaning that it's not applied. Like I can work on other parts of the scene and then I can come back to the donut and go like, I want it to be smoother. And then I can change the smoothness. And then I can come back to it later and go, it's too smooth. I want to change it again. So you're not actually like, nothing is being applied. It's just, all the settings are kept there so that you can come back and change them as you need to. So modifiers are fantastic. So what this subsurf modifier is doing is basically, if you look at each of these faces here, so this is what's called a face. And it's like when you've got 3 or more vertices and you add a solid face between them, that's a face. I don't know how else to explain it. But a subsurf modifier, what it's doing is it's adding like another grid between it, and it's taking like the average shapes of it. So like on the edge there, like where it was previously like sharp, it's doubled the resolution and it's averaged it out to try to smooth it. So what you're looking at is one subdivision because that's the viewport setting. The render setting is what it will render at, right? So when we get to that stage, that's the setting it's going to use. So if I was to increase viewport, it's doing another subdivision over that. If I was to increase it again, it would make it even smoother and smoother and smoother. You don't want to go too high though, because the higher you go, the more graphics is going to be used to render it in your viewport or when you do your actual render. So keep it low, but 1 is fine for this. Okay, so well done. All we've got is a lumpy donut, and yep, we did make a long video. So go ahead and join me in the next video, and we're gonna make the icing for our lumpy donut. G'day, and welcome back to the Donut Show, where we make virtual donuts you can't eat. So in this video, we're gonna make the icing. We're gonna start making the icing. So what I wanna do is I wanna basically, there's, as always, 100 ways you could do it, but the way I'm going to do it in this part is going to be the easiest way, and that's to take half of my donut, just cut off the top half, duplicate that, and then give it some thickness, and then that is going to look like icing on top of it. So what I want to do is, I'm in object mode right now, but if I went into edit mode, this will enable me to, as we mentioned in the last video, click on each of these vertices here. So I want to select half of my mesh. So if I was just to drag a box over it, you can see I'm selecting, but a couple of problems. One, you can see that like it's actually kind of hard to look like side on, but also I'm not selecting through the mesh. So first thing I want to show you is how to look directly side on, because this is kind of like freeform look and there's perspective things there, but sometimes when you're modeling you want to look dead on and like do like an intersection, like cut something in half. So I'm going to use number pad 1, and that will look front on to the mesh. You can also use number pad 3, and that's just the right-hand side of that, and then number pad 7 will look top down. Get my keyboard shortcut list if you haven't got that already, that'll come in handy. But it's all there. Alternatively, the other way, if you don't have the number pad, you can just click up here, these little axes here. That's how you can look side on, front on, etc. Or, as I mentioned before as well, for people that don't have a number pad, the tilde hotkey, that key underneath escape, that also has this little pie menu, so you can go top, right, left, or, because there's actually a fourth way you could do it, this is the same hotkey, I believe, as ZBrush, but if you hold down Alt and then middle mouse drag, like if I drag up or if I drag to the right or left, it'll just snap you to the closest axis view. Which is, there you go, there's 4 ways to do it now in Blender. There used to just be one, a number pad, right? But anyways, Blender's more accessible now, where we invite all colors into Blender now. The touch devices and styluses and everything. All right, so I'm looking front on right now. Now I want to select half the mesh, but I can't because I'm not able to see through it. So you can do that by going to the top there. There's a mode called X-ray mode. So X-ray, right. The hotkey for that, by the way, if you want it, is Alt-Z. Alt-Z will just toggle between that mode there. So with that there done, now I can drag a box over it, and you can see I've selected the top half of my donut. So I want it to be the top half, like you could go like that, but I want to make the icing, there's going to be like dribbling icing in the next part of the next video. We'll do the dribbling bit, but for now, just want to select the top part. So I want to duplicate this. So to do that, the hotkey is Shift D for duplicate. And when you do that, you'll notice immediately after that, it's duplicated it and it's now following your cursor. Now, I don't want to click right now because then that would just place it randomly here. I want to cancel its movement. So I want to snap it back to where it was because I want it to be just resting on the donut. So I can do that by hitting escape or by right-clicking. Either of those functions will cancel a movement and it will now snap it back to its original location. So it's duplicated and it's now resting on top of the donut. So straight after that, I want to immediately make it its own object. So to do that, the hotkey is P. P for part of it to be separated. I don't know why it's P. It's been P forever. But P for penguin. That's a good way to remember it. I don't know why I said that. We're going to select selection, okay? Selection. All right. So now that I've done that, if you exit out of edit mode into object mode, with tab, by the way, you can see we have 2 objects. Ta-da! And by the way, we haven't talked about the outliner, but it's this section in the top right-hand corner. It actually displays all of your objects. If you click this little drop down, you'll see all the objects that are currently in your scene. So you can see we've now got 2 objects called torus. So actually, this is a good point. We should probably give them names right now. So I can double click this and I can call it icing. The other way, by the way, you can rename something is at any point right here. It's the same hotkey as you rename a file in Windows, which is F2. So at any point, like where your mouse is somewhere, you just want to give something a quick name, F2 is how you can name it. I'll just call that donut, and you can see it's now given the name up there in the outliner, icing and donut. Just a quick thing, by the way, when we duplicated this, there's going to be some people following this tutorial that, and I'm just ignore this if you didn't do this, but some people are stuck right now because after they duplicated the icing, they right click and then they click something else, and now you have a horrible problem. The worst problem ever. You can see you've got mesh that is intersecting other mesh, and you don't know how to select part of the mesh, like the mesh that's on top of it, and it's the worst problem, worse than Hitler. No, but if you have this problem, what you want to do is there's a hotkey, Control L. If you've got like one vertice selected, Control L will select all of its connected vertices. So I'm saying this because some people will be stuck at this point and they'll be like, I can't continue. So that's how you do it. You select part of the mesh. Anyways, I'm going to delete that, and now we've got our donut and our icing. Ta-da! Okay, so it's now sitting on top. Hooray for us. By the way, this is my 3rd time recording this video, so I accidentally haven't done this. But when you, by default, this is what you'll see. No, one more. There we go. When you try to zoom into your donut, you'll see that it's like half. It's like cutting into your donut, and it's very annoying. It's just because the clipping amount for Blender, like as a default, is set like quite high, like the start clipping, which means that, because Blender's designed to work for like large scale scenes, and we're working at like 10 centimeters right now, really small. So this, I'm pushing N for Nelly. Nothing to do with properties, but it brings up the properties sidebar, or you can click the little arrow up there and drag that out. Anyways, clipping start, I just want to change that to 0.001. And now when I zoom into the donut, it doesn't clip, so we can actually get in close without things disappearing. Okay, I'll hide that again. Okay, so I want to give this some thickness. The donut is paper thin. It is a paper yarmulke, and we want to give it thickness. So there's a modifier for that. So if you go to the modifier stack, by the way, I discovered, someone in the comments mentioned, spanner and wrench are the same thing. Today I learned. So, icing. Make sure your icing selected, and we're going to go add modifier up here, and the one we're looking for is called solidify. What this does is it gives thickness to any mesh. So it basically extrudes it, and it's now given thickness to it. And you can see that. It's now a super, super thick icing. It's currently facing inwards, so that icing is pushing into the mesh itself. So there's this offset value here. If I drag that all the way up, it's now facing outwards. But it's too thick, obviously, unless you wanted a crazy amount of icing like they do for like cream cheese on bagels, right? It's just like, here's a kilo of cream cheese on a bagel. Too much. So what I want to do, just change this thickness amount to something reasonable. So I'll just type in, I don't know, 0.002. We'll give you 2 millimeters of icing. Maybe I'll add a 5 at the end there, just to, you know, it looks nice if it's like a juicy, thick icing on top. It's so gross. Dear. All right. So one final thing before we get to the next video. Hey, we're making good time. I want to move, because you can see like on the edge here, like that's a hard edge for that icing. It's you could cut your teeth on that edge there. It's a hard and right angle. And that's because what we've got is we've got the the subsurf modifier. It's smoothing it out, but it's doing that first, and then it's doing the solidify step after it, and it's giving it a hard right angle edge. So I want to swap those around because it works top to bottom. So I'm just going to hit the up arrow. Now it's solidify first, and now we've got a rounded edge for that icing there. Yay for us. Cool. So we will, in the next part of this tutorial, we will go in and edit it, and we'll actually start to make it look droopy, like it's dribbling down a little bit. So go ahead, click here towards the next video, and I'll see you there. G'day everyone. This part we are going to be making our icing look less like a hat and more like icing which dribbles down. So I'm in edit mode on my icing here, and first thing to note is that because we added the solidify modifier in the last step, you can't see most of this mesh underneath it. So with the solidify modifier, if we just uncheck that last box, it'll just disable it whilst you're in edit mode. So in object mode and rendering mode, you'll still see it, which is good because that's where you need it, but it'll be disabled in edit mode, so that's good. So we want to make like this part of the mesh, like we want to dribble it down, but we don't have enough of these vertices, these little dots. We don't have enough of those to add detail. So what I want to do is I'm going to select the mesh by hitting A. That's how you select all in Blender, or Alt A will deselect everything, by the way. And that is a common shortcut, whether you're in object mode, select all, Alt A, or edit mode, select all, Alt A. It's a widely used shortcut. Anyway, so I'm going to select everything. And what the heck did I just do then? Okay, select everything, and then I'm going to right-click on the mesh, and the top option there is subdivide. So what that has done, as it has, for every square that was there before, it has added in 4 squares in it. So it has doubled the amount of detail of our icing here. It's basically doing what the subsurf modifier is doing, like it's smoothing it out, but it's doing it on a mesh level instead of like as an after step for rendering. Getting a little complicated, but anyways, you can see we've got double the amount of detail. Now, before we do anything else, in the bottom corner, you'll see you've got subdivide. And there's a couple of options here, like you could increase the number of cuts and we get more and more and more detail, but 1 cut is fine for what we need it. The one thing we do want to change is you'll see like it has double the detail, but it's still jagged, right? And that's not a good look. We want it to be smooth. So we want it to also, for each detail, we want it to like average out the faces. So turn up the smoothness to 1, and you can see that edge there is now nice and smooth. Great, so that's how we're looking in object mode right now. Okay, so now we have enough detail, and you could see that if we were to grab one of these vertices here, vertex, vertex, the people in the comments are like, you keep using the wrong term. I swear it's vertices for plural, vertex, singular, and I stand by that. I don't know. If I was to grab a single vertex here, and I was to pull it down, and I want to use proportional editing for this. I want to keep that turned on. But if I was to do that, you can see the rest of the icing comes with it. And I really only just want that edge there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that edge there. And this is a common shortcut. I know I'm throwing shortcuts at you like it's rice at a wedding. I don't know where that's from. But it's Alt left click. Okay, so if you're on an edge there, just hold down Alt and then left click, and you're selecting an edge. That's the whole, you can select the whole loop like that as well, like the whole loop. Or in this case, yeah, just the whole edge, right? So with that selected there, I'm going to invert my selection, which you could do by going to select invert, or you can just remember the hotkey, which is Control I. And then another hotkey is hide. So I'm going to temporarily hide this by hitting H. Okay, to bring that back, it's Alt H, and then H is hiding it. So it's just temporarily taking it away so that you don't affect it, right? Okay, so woo, we finally got an edge with enough detail that we can start adding in detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of these little one singular vertex, and I am going to move it down. Okay, now one thing you'll note is that when you do this, if you were to move it down using proportional editing as well, it'll start to go through the donut. And, you know, you could move around and then pull that part out, etc. That's very fiddly. It would be great if the vertices stuck to the mesh underneath it. And we can do that by going up here. There is a snapping option. So you can snap by turning that on, and then we want to change what it snaps to. By default, it's increments, which means that like it'll stick to singular like grid floors, right? Which is definitely not what we need. We instead want to change it to face. So snap to face. And then if I pull it down, you'll see that it is sticking to the face. But I don't want just that to stick to the face. I want all of them to stick to the face. So I'm going to select project individual elements. And then when I do that, all of the vertices that are being affected are going to be sticking to the underlying face underneath it. And that's what we want. Yay! Okay, so let's do that a couple of times. Let's just go around it. And you'll notice also there are different types of proportional fall off. Like, for example, if you were to use sharp, then you would get kind of like that kind of like detail, right? So that can be kind of cool depending on what sort of thing you want. So here's the thing, like this step is actually kind of, it's a little bit fiddly because you can, without, if you're not careful, you can get kind of like repetitive looking icing, right? Like, like it just looks a little bit too machined, like a little bit too, I don't know what the term is. Like it doesn't look natural. That's the term. So anyways, that's pretty good. Okay, well, it's okay for now. What I want to do now though is like, this is like okay for like the overall, like just the edge of an icing, like being just a little bit jagged. But I also want to create some parts that are like dribbling down. Because if there's one thing I've learned from looking at Google Images, donuts on Google Images, is that, yeah, a lot of them have like dribbled down icing. I mean, to be fair, I think like the more commercial it is, the more I think they sort of dip it in a thing, and then it's like a cluggy kind of icing, so that it doesn't dribble as much. Like it does look kind of like a hat. You could do that if you want, but I just want to make it look a little bit like more delectable, like something you want to like, ooh, I want to eat that, right? So I just want to make parts of it that are like dribbling down it. So in a couple of areas on here, what I want to do is I want to select 2 vertices, and then, like if I was to like drag that down, you see that we don't have enough detail here, right? Because like parts of it are now sticking through because it's going to be, and don't copy what I'm doing now, but I'm just showing you like that's a huge face there. So part of it is like clipping through the donut. So I don't want to do that. What I do want to do though is I want to select 2 vertices, and then I'm going to hit E. So this is a new hotkey for you, but this is extrude. And now if I pull that down, it hasn't moved those two vertices there. They're staying the same, but it's created 2 new ones and it's pulled them down. So it's now basically creating another face. And now if I was to bring back the rest of the mesh, that is how it looks. Whoops, right there. And if you were to, obviously, the reason you're just seeing that part is because the rest of it's hidden, right? Because we temporarily hid it. But that's kind of what I want to do. So I'm just going to create, you don't want to do this too much because this is actually, you know, coming to, you know, the artistic eye and everything like that. I want to help you guys make a good looking donut. In this case, I grabbed 3, you'll see. Like if you do things repeatedly without, like you want to give emphasis to things. Emphasis, what am I talking about? You want to make parts of it that stand out from the rest. So if you just did like there to there, and then did there to there, and then there to there, and did like dribbles all the way around it in even increments, it would just look fake. So you want to do it kind of randomly. So yeah, somewhere there. I'm sort of picking an area which is like already slightly like pulling down to kind of, yeah, like you're basically you're creating the look of, you know, it was weighty icing and that part had too much weight to it. And so it actually dribbled down the edge there. So this part here I'll grab as well. I'll grab 3 of these and I'll pull them down. And by the way, I'm using S to scale. So I've got 3 vertices there and I'm just scaling, right? So this is why it's good to know those hotkeys, G, R, and S that I mentioned at the start there, because it's used everywhere. That's the good thing about Blender is once you've learned the hotkeys, they are applicable whether you're looking at nodes, whether you're in edit mode, object mode, it's all basically the same, G, R, S, they're kind of everywhere. Unlike the Adobe suite, which has got like Photoshop, After Effects, Illustrator, they've all got like all different hotkeys and it drives me insane. It's like, you're the same company. Why can't you just like, let's have a company meeting. Let's figure this out. Anyway, Adobe. So I'm going to just keep doing this a couple more times. Yeah, all right. Maybe one more here. 1, 2, 3. That's a little bit too predictable. That's the word I was looking for. Predictable. You don't want it to look predictable because real dribbling icing would not look predictable. But there we go, right? Okay, so I hope this step wasn't too confusing for you, but even if you can't do the extruding step, it's, you know, it's still going to be okay. You're still going to be all right. Your icing is going to look fine. Really, we're just trying to make it look a little bit more random than just a hat sitting on top. Now, the next step, we will actually do, like, sculpting, and we will, like, add in, like droplets, like make these things look less weird than they currently do. We'll get to that next. But one final thing before we get to the next part is you'll see that, like, the edge of this, like, drip here, like, all the way around it, like, it's kind of like it's wrapping into itself, even though I don't think real icing would look like that. Like, this part here wouldn't be like a complete blob unless it was, like, just wet and it just formed. You would see that kind of rolling fall off there. Anyway, what I'm saying is right here on this solidify thing, we can actually create a crease on the inner part of it, and it will make it look like it's hugging the donut underneath it a lot better. And immediately when you do that, the icing looks just immediately way better. So there we go. All right, so that's it for this part. It looks okay. In the next part, we're going to do some sculpting. So I will see you in that video once you click it. See you there. This video series is brought to you by Polygon. Make better renders faster. Time for something fun. We are going to be, I mean, working with a donut should be fun enough. But this part is particularly fun. We're going to be making both the donut and the icing on it look more shapely. So we're going to use sculpting to make this part look gloopy and like real icing, and it's a lot of fun. So before we do the sculpting, though, sculpting will, it'll work, but the only detail we have is what is available to us in edit mode. Like if we're sculpting on a donut, this is all the detail we have. So really, we want to have a lot more detail than what we've got currently. So over here in your modifier section, we've got the subdivision modifier, and there's a button, we can apply it. And if we hit apply, it'll apply that detail to our donut. But before I do that, it's a good idea to have a copy of what it is before you're going to apply it, just in case you need to go back. And I say this from like years of using Blender. Like, you know, you hit apply on something, you can't go back, by the way. Like a modifier, it's there and you can revisit it at any time. But once it's applied, it's like it's done. So that's why I think it's a good idea to keep a copy of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both my donut and my icing. I'm going to hit Shift D, and that's created. Oh, if you see it snapping like this, by the way, that's because your snapping tool is still turned on. So anyways, I have duplicated it, and you can see up here, we've now got 2 donuts and 2 icings. And I'm going to select my donut and my icing, and I'm going to hit M. So M is going to move it to a collection. So collections are at the top here. We can see we've got a collection, just the default collection. So what I want to do is I want to move it to a new collection, and then I'm going to hide that collection. So donut, my donut 001 and whatever, donut icing 001, I'm going to move those to a new collection like this, and I'm going to call this archive. I call it archive just to keep it out of the way. And then I'll call this original, just in case I want to come back to them. And then I'm going to, on this new collection here, I'm just going to uncheck that box next to it. So now I've still got my donut and icing, but if I want to, I can access another version of them. So that's just a way, you know, safety precaution for you. Okay, so with my donut here select, this is the one that we're going to sculpt on first. I'm going to hit apply on my subdivision surface. And there we go. We've got all this detail here to work with. So now, if I go to sculpting, so along the top navigation bar there, sculpting, zoom in a bit. Now we've got this. So we are in sculpt mode. And the hotkey you should remember, which has been turned off for some reason, there we go, is F. If you want to change the size of your brush, it is F. And there's also like, okay, where's the other settings for your brush? So if for some reason it's disabled, I'm pretty sure like a future version of Blender will have it enabled by default. But if you right click one of these buttons here, and then along the header, where it says header, just go show tool settings, then you'll actually get the settings that really should be there from the start. So I don't know why it's not there by default, but that's how you bring it in if you can't see it. Anyways, now that I've got this, yeah, I could change my radius there, and I can also change my strength. Hey, thank you for the reminder, Spider. It's always at the wrong time. Okay, now if I was to just draw on my mesh, you can see that we are sculpting. We're pulling parts of the mesh out, but you'll notice we're also pulling another part of the mesh out. The reason for that is that by default, X symmetry mirror is turned on. So that's useful if you're sculpting a face, but we're sculpting a donut, and that's very annoying. So I'm turning that off. And now when I sculpt, you can see we're pulling that out. Now, if I was to go into edit mode just to show you, it's pulled that out. That's exactly what it's doing right now. All it's doing is it's taking the mesh and it is deforming it in a way that's appropriate for sculpting. So you might wonder, well, what's the difference between sculpting and edit mode? I mean, not a lot. Like, you could do this next step, like in, edit mode and do proportional editing and all that kind of thing. But it's just different ways of working. Like, some ways, especially when we do, like, the deforming of the glooby bits of the icing, it's just easier to do with sculpting. Now, in the case of our donut, what we're going to do is we want to make it look like, because basically the way donuts are made is they come out of a fryer. I actually filmed it. Actually, I went to a donut shop and filmed it. But it comes out of a fryer, like it sits in a deep fryer, and it sits there bubbling, and then they flip it over, and then the other side. But basically, the part that is like floating, like along the level part of the donut, is it's uncooked. It's less cooked than the rest of it. So it's usually like the parts around it are sticking out a little bit more than the middle. So essentially, I can find a good photo of it. This one, right there. You can kind of see it there. This might actually be a bagel. I don't know what the American Bagel Company is. I mean, it might be a bagel. I don't know. But basically, like, the more cooked it is, I believe, the more it'll, like, build the yeast or whatever, right? It'll kind of, expand it a little bit more. Anyways, point is the part around the middle, I want to make it small. I want to make it shrunken a little bit. So if I was to just draw, it's actually going to pull it out. But if I hold down Control as I draw, you can see that it's actually pushing it in. And that is what I want to do. So I'm just going to go around it just like this. This isn't particularly fancy, but it does the job. Yeah. By the way, I'm doing this with a mouse, and I do have a stylus, but I'm doing it with a mouse because I know most people watching just have a mouse. A stylus will be immediately better for sculpting because you have pen pressure, and you can, like, taper off strokes just with pen pressure. Like, it's so much better with a stylus. So, if you get serious about sculpting or Blender at some point, it's probably a good investment. But I'm doing it with a mouse, so you can too. Okay, so that's okay. But having a look at this, we need a little bit more detail. It's a little bit low res. So I'm going back to layout mode. I'm just going to add another subsurf modifier. So I'll just add one here. Make sure, when you apply it, by the way, it'll apply whatever is in viewport subdivision, right? So it's just going to apply that. So I'm just going to apply, and there we go. Got a little bit more to play with now. Back to sculpt mode, and away we go. I did that step deliberately, by the way, because I know, I want to show you, like, the thought process of how you solve these sorts of problems. So, yeah, as you can see, pretty simple. Don't want to go too far, But the keyboard shortcuts, like Shift F, will actually be the strength. So if you don't want to have to keep going up there, you can just hit Shift F and you can control it there. And then F is the size of the brush. So I use F a lot, Shift F not so much, because it's a little weird to me. But yeah, anyway. Yeah, that's pretty cool. We could also change to, like, a smooth brush. Like, if you go too far, you could kind of smooth it out a little bit. Yeah, let's try using Shift F. There we go. Yeah, you can kind of control it like that. But okay, so that is the donut. I might actually, just while I'm here, actually, let me have a look. I didn't even do this for my my donut. What does the inside of a donut look like? Nothing. It looks completely perfectly round. Well, nothing's perfect, so I'm gonna just, like, I don't know. I'm gonna hold down Control, and I'm just gonna, like, add a little bit of detail here. Like, some detail is better than no detail, right? Even if it's just, like, a tiny little bit. It's better than it just looking completely perfect, because nothing is completely perfect in the real world. Okay, so the donut part is good. Now, we're going to do similar steps, but for the icing. So I'm going to apply my solidify modifier first, and then the next one is the subsurf modifier. Let me just unhide the rest of the mesh, just in case that causes problems later on, because it can. In your sculpt mode, you won't be able to see it. And the other thing, I'm just going to increase my subsurf modifier, just to give myself a little bit more detail in the sculpting stage. So I'm applying that to level 3, apply, and now this is the detail level that we have to work with. So I'm going to sculpt mode now. And along my brushes here, the one I'm going to use is called inflate. And this I'm going to use, yeah, the clip start. I believe we did this. Yeah, we did this in the previous tutorial, but changing the clip start. I guess there's a different clip start for different modes. But anyways, so I'm changing that so I can get in close. Inflate will allow me to sculpt. And what it's going to do is it's going to pull. Yeah, it's going to almost like it's like sticking inside the mesh, and it's like inflating it slightly. And it's going to create a like a dripping effect, which is very, very common for droplets. Like you can see just along that edge there, that's really hard to get there. But basically wherever, there's a better photo maybe, wherever the liquid builds up, like as gravity pulls it down, there's obviously going to be more built up there. So essentially I'm just doing a couple of clicks, obviously clicks, not clips, to make it look a little bit gloopy. So 1, 2, 3, maybe, something like that. This is where you don't copy me exactly. You see what I'm doing, and then you apply it to yours, because just a couple of clips, because your version is obviously going to be different to mine. You're going to have little droplets in different places. So it's just a matter of picking the droplets and just sculpting a little bit of detail. Just make sure that the tip of it, make it look like the weight of it, like it really is like the ball of the dripping icing is like at the head of it, at the very bottom of it, right? The inflate brush is really good for this. It's really handy. I'll do a little bit for this part here as well. It's pretty good. A little bit here maybe. Maybe, I don't know, it's a little bit weird. And you just go along it. It's kind of relaxing. It's quite a fun step. I like this part. So you just kind of imitate how liquid forms. Yeah, man, hardcore. Cool stuff. Cool, so that's about that. Now we can switch, of course, to the smooth step. If you go too far, you can like smooth something out if it looks a little bit odd, but that's okay. By the way, the parts that are sticking out, don't worry about that. We'll go back to the edit and we'll move those in, but for now it's okay. Oh, that part needs to be smoothed a bit. It looks a little bit odd, but that's cool. I guess we forgot to do it for like the edit stage. We forgot to like kind of like do this inner part ring here as well. So actually what I was just preparing for this tutorial, I was like, let's see if I can actually fix it just in sculpt and just add a few like little dropply bits. And yeah, you kind of can, because like the inner part of a donut, it's not going to have like lots of liquid that's like going to be dribbling down or whatever, but it's going to have a little bit. Like it's not going to be a perfectly clean edge. So I'm just using the grab brush and I'm just like pulling randomly around here, like so. Like it's kind of like been pinched in a little bit. And then I'll also use like the inflate brush and I'll inflate like little bits of it maybe, just like a little bit, just like running along the edge. And as I said, something is better than nothing. All right, that's pretty good. And then the only other thing we are going to do is use draw mode with a small strength, 0.2 or something like that. And I'm just going to create a little bit of random displacement across my icing here. Because we got the sculpt brush out, why not, right? Gone to the trouble of preparing the mesh so that we can sculpt on it. Might as well add in a little bit of detail, because the real world, like, I mean, as if icing could ever be perfectly just the right amount of like 25 millimeters that we used for the solidify modifier. Like it's never going to be as perfect as that in the real world. So there's going to be parts that are going to have more icing, thicker icing, less than others, etc. So it's just adding in that detail. You can also hold down control, of course, to go the other direction. And then if you go too far, you can smooth it out a little bit as well. This is, you know, it's getting a painting sort of look to it. But that's kind of cool. It looks a little bit like icing. Okay, so going back to layout mode, you'll see, you know, as I mentioned, you've got parts that are like sticking out. Obviously, that's not going to be like that for I mean, maybe if it was like frozen in time as the droplet fell, but it's, we want it to stick to the donut. So in edit mode, we have a lot more vertices to play with. And this is, by the way, where it comes to like, as I mentioned, like you want to have as few vertices as possible whilst you're editing. This is what I mean. Like this is really hard to control this mesh right now because there's so much going on with it. But as it turns out, we really just need to just like move that part in a little bit. So provided we have proportional editing turned on and we've got it set to smooth, if I grab that little piece there, turn up my proportional editing and I pull that in, and also I'm going to use rotate, so R to rotate. Why is that turned off? It just randomly turns off the screencast tool so you can't see what I'm pressing, which is annoying. So my apologies if sometimes I'm using stuff on here and the tool is turned off. It's just, it's a little buggy. It's a great add-on, you know, props to whoever made it. It's very handy, but a little buggy. So I'll just pull that in a little bit. There we go. Like that. So you just want to make it look like it's obviously hugging the donut. Like it's really part of the donut. And yeah, just do that for the rest of it. We have gone over though, so we will do that. I will do that off camera. Just continue this for all of the droplets along the thing. Thank you for watching. Go ahead and join me in the next part as we continue making the donut. I believe we're doing materials next. So click here and I will see you in the next video.
It's a little boring, sure, but tutorial
All right, well,
is
congratulations
great.
on making it thus far into the tutorial.
For a
the mesh of
beginner,
the donut,
obviously,
like the shape, is pretty
great
well finished.
tutorial.
Now we can start talking about lighting and rendering. So everything we have done thus far has just been in sort of viewport mode, right? Like in this shaded, this is solid view viewport mode. But when you actually create a final image, or an animation, it's actually going to be using a separate mode called rendered view mode. And that is where you actually determine how things look, like the color of things, where the light is, all that kind of thing. So that you can actually have a look at by clicking on that final little dot there. That's rendered view mode. Or by the way, a hotkey for switching between all these modes here is Z, and that'll bring up this pie menu here. So this is solid view, what we've always been looking at, and then that's rendered. We've also got two others which we haven't really used. We'll probably use them later on. But anyways, for now, we're going to have a look at rendered view mode. And this is rendered view mode, okay? So things look a little different. Not too much different, but a little bit different. One biggest thing is that there's light, right? There's an actual directional light. And we know that that it's working because that's our light over there, right? Now, if we move this light in closer, which we could do just by hitting G and sort of move things around, and I just realized this screencast tool is turned off. Okay, good. Just keep that active. So if we move this light in, just closer to our donut, like so, you can see that as I move this around, that it's the light and the shadow is reflected on that donut there. Okay, so let's make this scene a little more interesting, because right now there's like the donut's not casting any shadow onto anything else because it's just a donut hovering in outer space, basically. So let's add in a plane. Okay, so for some reason, by the way, my cursor, that little cursor, is turned off. This, by the way, it's not important, but this drop down here is how you can determine the look of your viewport, if there's anything to turn on or off. Anyway, the 3D cursor, and the reason the 3D cursor is important is that I'm going to add a plane, and wherever the 3D cursor is where new objects get dropped. And you can move your 3D cursor by shift right click. That'll change this 3D cursor, or just shift C will actually clear it, and it'll put it in the center of your grid floor. Anyways, so I'm going to add a plane, one thing at a time. Shift A is that menu for adding new things, and we're going to go for mesh plane. And there we go, we have a plane. And I'm going to focus on the plane just so I can move around it. Good. Okay, so I want my donut to obviously be sitting on the plane, so it's like sitting on a countertop. So we could, grab my donut here and move it up, but then the icing doesn't come with it. And it's obviously very important that these two are linked. We could select them both by hitting Shift, and selecting them both like that. But let's save ourselves some time for the future as well and link these two. So we do that by parenting it. So the way you parent things in Blender is you select first the object that is the child of a parent object, meaning like the one that's supposed to follow another object. So the icing first, then Shift, click on the object which is going to become the parent, the master object, and then I'm going to hit Control P for parent. And then I'm going to select, you can select object or object keep transform. I always use keep transform because sometimes if you're working with lots of stuff, the first one doesn't do exactly what you'd expect. Keep transform always works, but basically that. And then when you do that, if you move your donut, you will see that the icing comes with it, which is what we want. Nice. By the way, in your outliner up here, where you've got the objects, when you parent something to another object, it looks as though it's vanished from the outliner, but it's actually just underneath it now. So it's inside the outliner underneath that object above it. Anyway, but now we've got that. Now the donut is the master of all, the keeper of light and truth, and the icing is following it. Good. All right, so let's just move this lamp in a little bit closer, like so. Okay, so why is there no shadow? Why is the donut not casting shadow onto the plane there? Well, we could, with our lamp here selected, we could check it out. Oh, contact shadows. Oh yeah, I've done this tutorial a couple of times. Contact shadows was turned on, but turned off by default. But anyways, it's using this light here, and these are all the settings for the light. Now, we could turn down the strength of this. We could change, how things look. But you can see that the shadow's not really there. We could turn on contact shadows, which will give a little bit of shadow to it, and that's all well and good. But the thing is that this mode that we're in right now, this render view mode, it's using a rendering engine to present this to us. And the rendering engine that is defined by default in Blender, if we go to the rendering panel up here, the render engine is Eevee, which is a real-time rendering mode. And it's really, really fast renders. Like if you want to do like a long animation, like a TV show, or you're working on a really tight deadline, Eevee is great because it's like really fast. And it's just like Unreal Engine, it's like all those kind of things. It does require a lot of optimization though. Like you've got to really work with light and shadow to try to make it look correct. However, Blender comes with another render engine. Workbench, by the way, forget that. That's just for like viewport. It's very rarely used. Cycles is the other main one. So if we switch to cycles, it will look like this. Now my recording is going to be slightly screwed up because the device of which it is going to be rendered as by default is set to CPU. I want to change this to GPU, and that's going to use my graphics card. So I've got two NVIDIA GTX 1080 Ti's, so it's important that I actually use those because they're way faster than my CPU. If you don't see GPU here, by the way, you can actually go edit preferences, and then underneath system, you'll actually show the devices that you have that are compatible with CUDA or OpenCL. OpenCL, I believe, is for AMD cards. CUDA is NVIDIA's cards. So you may, depending on your hardware, you may see something here. You might not have anything that's compatible, like CUDA or OpenCL, in which case you're going to have to use CPU. And that's fine. It's just CPU is generally a little bit slower than GPU. So you'll still be able to render. Doesn't matter, but it just might be a little bit slower. Anyways, I'm going to use GPU. Now you'll notice that when we switched from EV to cycles, it looks much more realistic immediately. The shadows are accurate. The shadows are matching the donut here. Everything is working the way you would expect. And that's because Cycles is what's called an unbiased rendering engine, which means it calculates things like physically accurate to the way things are in the real world. It's like throwing light inside the donut, and it's like bounce lighting around inside this ring here. If there was different colors, you would see like light bleed, like it would reflect the light onto other parts of it. These shadows here, they're all accurate. Animated movies like Pixar, Disney, all VFX, everything like that uses render engines like Cycles, unbiased, ray-traced engines. Video games use something like Eevee, although Eevee will not allow you to create a game. It's not a game engine, but the way it functions is very similar. So anyways, a polished, high-quality image or animation, you want to use Cycles. So the one downside to Cycles is that it is grainy. So you'll notice that like as you move around, it's like super heavily grainy, and then it gets less and less grainy as time goes on. And you can actually see in the top left-hand corner the samples there being counted. So it'll stop at 32. And the higher you set those limits to, when we get to that, the less grainy it will become. Anyways, so I know this tutorial, there's not a lot to this tutorial other than explanation, but it's quite important, so I'm spending a whole video just talking about it. But anyways, let's render out like a very simple image. So my camera, the camera is what will actually be defined, like what you will look through when you hit render, like to actually render a final image. So you can actually look through what the camera is seeing by clicking that little button there, or by hitting the shortcut as it's displayed, number pad 0. And there we go. I'm looking through the camera. So we're way, 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 way out there. Now, you can move the camera closer, but you'll notice like if you move the view or like use the middle mouse or whatever to orbit, you are no longer looking through the camera. So the camera will stay where it is unless you use the controls designed for the camera, which is similar to like if you're moving an object. It's G to move that object, and then you use the middle mouse, you push that once, and then you can like zoom in. Now, a lot of people from other software and even like beginners are like, they find it very weird the way this functions. Other software, it has it so that when you are looking through the camera, if you move the viewport or whatever, the camera will follow with it. So you can actually choose that by clicking lock camera to view in this properties here with the camera selected. And now as I move around, I can use the standard controls, middle mouse, orbit, scroll to come closer, etc., and the camera will follow. So you can use that if you want. Or the other way, by the way, is like, this is the way I like to work. I get my position, like where I want the camera to be like looking, just in like standard view mode like this, and then I hit Control Alt number pad 0, and then the camera will snap to the location that I'm looking at right there. But anyways, I just want to do like a very simple, like this is a full tutorial which will go into like, we'll add brick in the background and coffee and a plate and all that kind of thing. But for now, I just want to have like a very simple look, right, of the donut on a plane. So I've got some light there. So if I was to render this right now, which you can do by going to the top corner and hitting render, or the hotkey is F12. Anyways, when I do that, this will happen. You'll see that it starts, you've got like these little squares that will appear. It'll start in the middle and it'll sort of spiral out. And there we go. We have an image. And if we were to hit Shift S, or by going to image and then save, Shift S, you would actually be able to save it as like a PNG or a JPEG. Very simple, right? So it doesn't look very good. Doesn't look very good at all. It's very white, looks like it's made of clay. So we'll do the materials in the next video. But for this one, yeah, just wanted to set the camera up, get the light somewhat in an appealing way. I do have like, lighting is such a complex, well, it's not, you can get the basics. Like basics is pretty easy, but understanding how light works, I've got like a full series on that. I'll put a link to that in the description and you can click up there if you want to watch it now, but it's more for like once you've got the basics of Blender, you can watch that, but it'll explain all about like fall off, the inverse square law and all that kind of thing. But for now, I want you to know is like, you'll see that it's pretty clear that there's light that's very close to the donut. Like it's kind of like a highlight over here. And then towards the right-hand side, you've got like, it's darker. If you want to have like even lighting over everything, you basically need to move the lamp further away from your subject, and then there will be less fall off. It'll appear more constant, almost like sunlight, which in this case might be kind of desirable. We want to have just kind of like evenly flat lighting across a counter. So I'm moving it, that far. You don't have to copy my exact settings. Like just, it actually, you'll learn more by doing things on your own and like experimenting with how things look, right? So I'm moving my lighting over there. When you move it away, obviously the lighting intensity is reduced because it's falling off. So the brightness of it is defined by the power. So you can increase the brightness right there. And I'll go with something like that. And then, as a way to get into the next video, because we're going to start talking about materials, with my plane here selected, I'm going to go to the material setting right down there, the material panel. I'm going to click that. You won't see this, by the way, that's an add-on that I've got enabled. I should probably turn that off. But at the top, so this is material. This is where you define what colors things are going to look, textures, all that kind of thing. So with my plane selected, I'm going to click New to give it a new material. Nothing's changed so far because it's just the default setting. But the one setting here that we're going to change just in this video, base color. I'm going to make this blue, like so. And there we go. We now have a donut sitting on a blue plane, and I'm going to go ahead and hit render, like so. There we go. And then let's go save it if you wanted to. By the way, I haven't even talked about saving your scene in Blender yet. So just go save as and save your scene, your .blend file. It's pretty simple, but I know like ZBrush makes things pretty hard when it comes to saving. But Blender's pretty easy. It's just like save. But that's separate to the image, which I was talking about. Save the project of the blend. Anyways. Hope you learned something from this video. Go ahead and join me in the next video, and we are going to be making the icing look pink, the donut look yellow, and getting into the materials. So I will see you in that video. This tutorial series is brought to you by Polygon. Make better renders faster. Welcome to the last part of level 1. So as the final step, we are going to be adding some materials to our icing and donut, and then doing a final render, at least final for level 1, to create just a nice little cute squishy pink donut. So with our icing selected, I'm going to the materials panel, and I'm going to add a new material. So we just touched briefly on it before, but this is where you change the properties for a material, and there are a lot of properties, and it can be extremely daunting, I know, as a beginner to like see all this and go like, oh my goodness, how am I gonna, the good news is you don't need to know most of this. Like, especially as a beginner, there's only like 2 or 3 things you change a lot. Like even myself, I like to think of, oh, here we go, spider utility, thank you, nice reminder again. I like to think I know Blender, but I barely ever touch like anisotropic, sheen, clear coat, transmission mode. Like I barely touch most of this. There's really only like 2 or 3 you touch a lot. So the first one is base color, which is the base color of a material. That's the easiest way to say it. It's material can get very sciencey, but it's the albedo side of a material. It's like the underlying. There's no way to explain it. It's the base color, okay? It doesn't affect the reflection color. It doesn't affect bump. It doesn't do anything like that. All it is just like the underlying color of a material. So we're going to make it look pink or whatever, I'm not here to tell you what your donut should look like. You could give it blue icing, purple icing, orange icing, yellow icing. It's entirely up to you. But I happen to think that pink icing looks kind of nice. Looks kind of delicious. So there we go. All right. Now the second property that you change a lot for materials is the roughness. The roughness defines how reflective the material looks, or how sharp the reflection actually looks. So the lower value you go, like if you go all the way to 0, it's almost like it's a mirror. It's completely sharp. And then as you go higher and higher, you can see that reflection of the lamp there becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you go all the way to 1, it looks almost as if it's made of chalk. And this is how you define how reflective something looks. Some people, especially a lot of beginners, they think that the way to turn off a reflection is to change the specular value. And you can do that, but it's overriding the actual like physically accurate properties of the real world, because every object in the real world actually has reflection. Sounds crazy, but even a brick, even chalk, everything has reflection. It's so rough that you almost can't see it, but it's still there. So I would suggest not touching specular or specular tin or anything like that. I would suggest just leave it as is, and just change the roughness. And if you want to turn off reflection, just crank it all the way up to 1. Anyways, in our case though, we're making this look like icing. It helps to have a reference of icing. So I actually went and bought a donut from the shops, and I put it on a plate here and I filmed it for you so you can see how reflective the icing looks. The more melted it looks, like the fresher out of the oven and freshly glazed, it's gonna look wet, right? So that would be like a low sharp value there. But I find like a value of about like 0.3, 0.34, something like that. I think looks kind of good. I think it looks fine. Okay, so there's that. And then for most materials, the only other value that you change a lot is like the normal value, because that's the bump. So if you're adding like a bumpy sort of surface or something, you would change that. But you have to have something to plug into it when we get to more advanced materials in the following levels. We'll talk about that. But for this thing, we don't have any bump. We're just going to leave it as is. Now, because this is icing, icing is actually a kind of a rare type of material in that there is another property to it, and that is called subsurface scattering. So you can see looking at this right now, it does look like icing, but something seems off about it. Like it almost looks like it is too hard, right? It looks like it's almost made of concrete. And the reason for that is that looking at our reference of real icing, light isn't just hitting it and bouncing off it, light's actually entering into it and it's bouncing around. And that is very much similar to human skin. So real human skin, it has, you can see it especially like on like the corners of people's ears, right? Like with the sun behind them, you see like red ears. And that's because it's like almost slightly translucent and light is entering into the skin and it's bouncing around and you get different values. Well, food actually has this property as well. So humans have it, some natural materials and like food basically has this property. So that's this value here, subsurface scattering. So if we increase this, you can see that it starts to, I mean, it looks different, it looks a little weird, but it has that kind of fleshy quality to it. So the one value that you want to change is the color of this. By default, it's set to white. So we could set this to a pinkish reddish color. Actually, there's very little information online about how to actually use subsurface color. It's kind of like a little out in the open, but based on my tests, I find like giving it like a kind of a reddish pink color is good. But then also you've got subsurface radius, which defines how far the light actually bounces around inside the object. And by default, and here's the other thing, there's 3 values, not just one value, but 3 because there's one for each channel, red value, green value, and blue value, which is weird to me. I don't get it. I'm sure there's a very scientific, accurate reason. But anyways, my advice for you, because the top one is the red value, I would suggest setting that to like a 0.3 and then setting these others to 0.1. The green and the blue, and then that will give it like a reddish tint to it, and it'll go like, it won't go too far as well. You don't want it to look like wax, which is what can happen if you overdo the subsurface value. So actually that does kind of look a little odd to me. 0.25 perhaps. Maybe this is a little bit too something. I don't know. We can tweak these values after. We don't have to be like locked into it right now, but somehow this is looking a little odd to me. I know I went with like 0.3 for my final one. But yeah, maybe I'll go 0.15, 0.15 for these other 2 values as well. That looks a little bit better. Just a little bit more spread, a little bit more light coming through the donut. You know, you can tweak these all day. 0.3, yeah, there we go, a little bit redder. Nice, okay. Okay, so that's the icing. The icing looks pretty darned good. In the next part, we're gonna put sprinkles on top, but for now, we have some icing, not bad. All right, now for my, by the way, I've been turning on and off this overlays. That's just like, you know, the camera, like the outline of selected objects. If I'm working on materials and things like that, I find it helpful to just turn it off so that I can just focus on what I'm doing. But then in order to see what you're selecting, of course, you want to make sure you have it turned on. But anyways, I have my donut selected now. So let's give the donut a material. We are in the future parts. We're going to give this a proper material, like texture paint it and make it look parts that are like white as well as dark. But just for now, we're going to give it the simplest material just to make like a really quick render. And that's just to make it look a little bit bready, a little bit orangey yellow, like so. And then the other thing, I'll give it a little bit of subsurf, just a little bit, because it is food as well. So bread has light enter into it just a little bit. And I'll just make sure it's yellow. And then let's go 0.1, 0.1. Like so. All right. Donut is looking donutty. So with my camera selected, it's a little far away from my donut. So I'm going to hit G to move my camera, and that'll move it along, you know, like I'm grabbing it. And then I'm going G and then middle mouse button. And then that'll just like, you just push the middle mouse once and it's like moving it along. It's like forward front facing axis. I don't know, but it's just how you move it forward and back. What's the term? It's like on a rail in, not pan. Oh, dolly. That's the word I'm thinking of for cameras. It's like dollying it in and out. Anyway. Okay, cool. So we're going to do a little render. So obviously for the final, whatever you call it, final, you know, all the way to level 4, we're going to put like a brick behind it, do a coffee, a plate, and all that kind of thing. But just for now, we're just going to make a nice, very simple render for people that want to end it right here. End it all, end it like they're going to commit suicide. This was the last thing you were going to watch. And then that inspired you. All right, that's a little dark. Anyway, in this case, what I want to do is I want to have the light just a little bit behind the donut, but this is a case where you can kind of see like having like just a single view like this, like looking through my camera. I want to be able to move my light around, but I can't really do it from this view. So let's talk about splitting the view. To split the view in Blender, you just go up to wherever there's a border and then just right click it. And then you've got an option to vertical split or horizontal split. By the way, I believe this is a 2.81 feature because that's the version I'm using right now. If you're following along with me, you might just have a like join or something like that. Like you might have to go to the like this side and do it there. But anyways, so we do a vertical split and then we have a split. And then over here, I now have just another window. And I can move this around and you can see that it's interactively updating that one at the same time, which is nice. There we go. The other way, by the way, if you want to collapse or split something again, if you move to the very top right-hand corner, this is kind of like the legacy way of doing it, but like your cursor changes to like a little target symbol. If you click and drag that way, it splits it, and you can do it this way as well. And then if you want to join them, like collapse them, you just do it in the opposite direction. Click and drag that way. So yeah, that's pretty good. The only other thing I'm going to do as well is like the size of my lamp there. It looks a little bit like, sorry, I'm going to split the view again so that we can actually see the lamp. It looks a little bit like sunlight, like it looks a little bit too hard of light source. So I'm going to, whoops, not the power, the size of my light right there. You can see the larger I make this, the softer this shadow becomes. If I turn off my overlay, I can focus on a little bit better. You don't want to go too soft because then it kind of like loses emphasis or direction, but just something that's not looking like sunlight, something like that. And I'll turn down the power just slightly. Oh, by the way, now that we're talking, about doing a final render, in my full lighting series, which if you do get serious about CG, I recommend watching that because I go into a lot of detail about this, but I explain how you can actually find out what the correct light value you should be using because every monitor is actually different and what looks okay to you might look too dark or too bright for somebody else. So if you don't have that thing that's been popping up repeatedly as the spider, I've got this device which will like make my monitor more accurate for color. But if you don't have one of those, you don't need it. If you switch in the render settings right here, you've got a underneath color management, you've got a view transform. If you change that to false color, everything will look psychedelic. But these values here will tell you whether something is overly bright or not. And really you want things to be at just above, like just on gray or above gray. So this like top of this icing here is kind of like what my focus is going to be. So looking at my lamp, I'm just going to turn that down just a little bit. Like it can be a little bit overexposed. This green value here can be a little bit overexposed, but not too much. Anyway, that's enough. That's enough for now. And then before I do another render, I'll just, because I actually think that blue for the ground, it looks okay, but I actually realized that you can use, if you make it like within this pink pastel color, we did split testing for this tutorial. We put some adverts up on Facebook to test, what thumbnail would actually perform best for this tutorial. And yeah, apparently we did like some different ones with like the background here, and we had ones that were blue and then some that were pink, and the pinks outperformed by a lot. So yeah, I guess like it's up to you, but based on my test, it seems like the aesthetic looks, it looks nicer when you have like just pink on pink. So that's what I'm going to go with. All right, now before we do a render, I'm going to give this a save. Let's give this a save right now. I just hit Control-Shift-S to do that save. And all right, now if we hit F12 right now, which is the shortcut for rendering, you'll see these tiles will appear. It'll go one by one by one. And yeah, so I do have 2 tiles because I have 2 graphics cards and I'm using the GPU. If you have CPU, you might see like 8 tiles because it's going to use the cores of the CPU to do it. But CPUs are often generally slower than graphics cards. But anyways, so the speed at which it's doing this is dependent on the number of samples. So the samples are defined right here. So the viewport is set to 32 by default. So you can see in the viewport here, it's quite noisy because we're rendering at just 32 samples, which is a very, very low sample amount. The final render, it's doing at 128, which you can see is far less noisy. But when you zoom right in, you can still see there's quite a lot of noise there. So one way to reduce that is to just increase that. But every time, like if you were to double the samples and make it 256, right? 256 samples, that would kind of like double the render time. And you can do that, but yeah, you wouldn't ever even really clear up all the noise. There would always be like some noise there. Thankfully, there is something called denoisers, which after the render is finished, it can try to intelligently read where the, there it is, where the edges are and where noise is and try to remove the noise. And 2.8, Blender 2.8, so if you're watching this as I upload it, make sure you get this latest version from the Blender Builder website. Blender 2.81 has a denoiser in it, which is incredible. It's the Intel AI denoiser. And the way you use it is you go to your layer panel first, and you make sure you turn on denoising data. And then when you do that, you have to do another render. So we'll do that quickly. There we go. And then once the render is finished, we're going to go, and this is, for a beginner tutorial, it's a little advanced, but we're going to go to the compositor. So this compositor tab along the top there. And this is, it's everything that's going to happen to your render after a render is finished. And what you can do in here is you could add in nodes that do things. You could add glow, glare, you can do all sorts of things, color grading, everything can happen in here. And it's a little advanced, but just follow me for just this part, and later on in the future levels, we'll talk more about using nodes properly. But just for this, it's really simple to do. We're going to hit Shift A, same hotkey as the viewport, and we're going to add in a denoiser node. Since this is so new, I actually just realized I don't even know which menu it's under, but you can do a search. You can type in denoise. So with this, all we need to do is take the output of the, noisy image, put that into the image part, the denoising normal, the purple goes in the purple, and then the denoising albedo goes into the albedo. And then we take that and we put that into the composite input right there. Now, when we do that, if we were to hit F11, F11, by the way, is the hotkey to bring up the old render, the most recent render. Nothing has actually changed because when you're doing, I don't know why they changed this in Blender, but it really annoyed me. Like, it won't actually affect the final render unless it's viewable as you're using the compositor. You could do another render right now and it would actually kick into gear. But in order, like if I don't want to have to do another render, I can just go to the image editor down here, set this to render result, and then if I take this out and put this back in, it will actually refresh it, do the full render, and now control space, by the way, will maximize any view that your mouse is over. So control space, bring that up, and now as we zoom in, you can see it's cleared up all that noise as if it were magic. And it's really, really powerful, this Intel denoiser. And as far as I know, it will work on even AMD processors, as far as I know. Maybe that'll change in the future. I don't know when Intel catches on to what the AMD users are up to. But it's really, really super impressive. Blender had a denoiser previously, and it did it quite immediately. Like it was easier to use, but it was really like, didn't do anywhere near as good a result as this. So yeah. There we go, guys. So that is the end of level 1. You made it. Yay! So thank you for watching. Go ahead and share it with your friends if you found this helpful and help them get into Blender. But I hope you will continue the rest of this series as we add in sprinkles. We'll learn about particles. We'll learn about displacement, making the donut look more like textured, bumpy donuts, adding in bumps, as well as texture painting on textures, and then doing precise modeling for the coffee cup, and then final renders and animation as well to the end. So it's a big series, and it's designed to give you that full scope of what you're going to need to know in Blender. So I hope you will join me in the next level. Go ahead and click here if you're ready to start watching now.